英日対訳、名作で英語を学べるシリーズNo.3。猫の事務所ある小さな漢画に関する幻想宮沢賢治。この音声は、Cefr B1 相当、Toeic リスニング&リーディングテスト500から600点程度の学習者向けです。本書を開きながらお聞きください。まずはリスニング、次にシャドーイング、最後に音読に挑戦してみましょう。単語リスト、覚えておきたいフレーズ、TOEIC 登録商標マーク形式の練習問題は書籍に収録しています。YouTube 概要欄から書籍をご覧いただけます。それでは物語の世界を楽しみながら英語を学んでいきましょう。
The Cat Office. A fantasy about a small government office. Kenji Miyazawa. Near a light railway station, there was the Six Cat Office. This was a place mainly for studying the history and geography of cats. All the clerks wore short black satin suits. They were highly respected by everyone. Therefore, whenever a clerk quit for some reason, all the young cats in the area tried very hard to get the open position. However, the number of clerks in this office was always fixed at exactly 4. So, out of many candidates, only the one with the best handwriting and poetry reading skills was finally chosen. The chief clerk was a large black cat. He was getting a bit old and forgetful, but his eyes were truly impressive. They looked as if many layers of copper wires were stretched inside them. Now about his staff. The first clerk was a white cat. The second clerk was a tabby cat. The third clerk was a calico cat. The fourth clerk was a stove cat. Being a stove cat is not something a cat is born with. Any kind of cat can become one. They have a habit of sleeping inside a stove at night. Because of this, their bodies are always dirty with soot. Their noses and ears are especially black with soot, making them look somewhat like raccoon dogs. Therefore, stove cats are hated by other cats. However, in this office, the chief was a black cat. Normally, no matter how smart this stove cat was, he would never have been able to become a clerk. But he was chosen out of 40 candidates. In the middle of the large office, the chief black cat sat heavily behind a desk covered with bright red cloth. On his right side sat the first clerk, the white cat, and the third clerk, the calico cat. On his left side sat the second clerk, the tabby cat, and the fourth clerk, the stove cat. Each of them sat neatly on a chair in front of a small table. You might wonder why cats need to know about geography and history. Well, it goes something like this. Someone knocked on the door of the office. "Come in," shouted the chief black cat. He leaned back arrogantly with his hands in his pockets. The 4 clerks were looking down, busily checking their record books. A luxurious cat entered the room. "What do you want?" asked the chief. "I want to go to the Bering region to eat glacier mice. Where would be the best place to go?" First clerk, tell him the habitat of glacier mice." The first clerk opened a large record book with a blue cover and answered. "They are in Ustragamana, Nova Iskaya, and the Fusa River Basin." The chief said to the luxurious cat, "Ustragamana, Nova, what was it again?" "Nova Iskaya," the first clerk and the luxurious cat said at the same time. "Right, Nova Iskaya, and then what?" "The Fusa River." The luxurious cat said it together with the first clerk again. The chief looked a bit embarrassed. Yes, the Fusa River. Well, those places would be good." "And what should I be careful about during the trip?" Second clerk, state the precautions for traveling in the Bering region. Yes, sir. The second clerk flipped through his record book. Summer cats are not suited for travel at all. For some reason, everyone glared at the stove cat at this moment. Winter cats must also pay close attention. Near Hakodate, there is a danger of being caught with horse meat. Black cats, in particular, must clearly show that they are cats while traveling. Otherwise, they might be mistaken for black foxes and seriously chased. Good, it is just as he said. You are not a black cat like me, so you don't have to worry much. You just need to be careful of horse meat in Hakodate. I see. Then, who are the powerful figures over there? Third clerk, list the names of the powerful figures in the Bering region. Yes, let me see. In the Bering region, yes, there are two of them, Tabaski and Jinzaski. What kind of guys are Tabaski and Jinzaski? Fourth clerk, give a brief description of Tabaski and Jinzaski. Yes, sir. The fourth clerk, the stove cat, had already placed his short paws on the pages for Tabaski and Jinzaski in the large record book. Both the chief and the luxurious cat seemed very impressed by his readiness. However, the other three clerks looked at him sideways in a mocking way and sneered. The stove cat read from the book as hard as he could. Chief Tabaski is highly respected. His eyes are sharp, but he speaks a little slowly. Jinzaski is a wealthy man. He speaks a little slowly, but his eyes are sharp. Well, I understand now. Thank you. The luxurious cat left the office. Things went like this, and it was quite convenient for cats. However, about half a year after this event, the sixth office was finally closed down. You might have already guessed the reason. The fourth clerk, the stove cat, was deeply hated by the three senior clerks. In particular, the third clerk, the calico cat, desperately wanted to do the stove cat's job himself. The stove cat tried various ways to make everyone like him, but somehow his efforts always backfired. For example, one day, the tabby cat next to him took out his lunch. When he was about to start eating on his desk, he suddenly felt a strong urge to yawn. So, the tabby cat stretched his short arms as high as he could and let out a very big yawn. Among cats, this is not considered rude, even to superiors. For humans, it is just like twisting a mustache. So, the yawn itself was not a problem. The problem was that he braced his legs, which caused the table to tilt slightly. His lunchbox slid down and finally fell with a clatter onto the floor in front of the chief. The lunchbox was dented, but it was made of aluminum, so it did not break. The tabby cat quickly stopped yawning and reached down from his desk to grab it. His paws could barely touch it. The lunchbox just moved here and there, and he couldn't catch it well. You can't do it. You can't reach it, the chief black cat said with a laugh. He was munching on some bread. At that moment, the fourth clerk, the stove cat, had just opened his own lunchbox. Seeing this, he quickly stood up, picked up the lunchbox, and tried to hand it to the tabby cat. However, the tabby cat suddenly became very angry. He refused to accept the lunchbox the stove cat kindly offered. He put his hands behind his back, shook his body in frustration, and yelled, "What is this? Are you telling me to eat this lunch? Are you telling me to eat a lunch that fell from the desk onto the floor?" "No. You were trying to pick it up, so I just picked it up for you." "When did I try to pick it up?" "Huh. It fell right in front of the chief, and I thought it was very rude. So I was just trying to push it under my desk." "Is that so? I just thought it was because the lunchbox was moving around too much." "What did you say? How rude. Let's have a duel." "Jara, Jara, Jara, Jaren," the chief shouted loudly. He purposely interrupted the tabby cat to stop him from challenging the stove cat to a duel. "Now stop fighting. The stove cat didn't pick it up to make you eat it. Oh, and I forgot to tell you this morning, but your monthly salary has been raised by 10 Senator." At first, the tabby cat listened with a scary look on his face, though he bowed his head. Eventually, he couldn't help but smile with joy. "I am very sorry for causing such a disturbance." Then, he glared at the stove cat next to him and sat down. "Everyone, I feel sorry for the stove cat." About 5 or 6 days later, something very similar happened. The reason these things happen often is partly because cats are lazy. Another reason is that their front legs, or their arms, are too short. This time it was the third clerk, the calico cat. Before he started working in the morning, his brush rolled off his desk and fell onto the floor. He should have just stood up. However, being lazy, he tried to reach for it over his desk with both arms, just like the tabby cat had done. Again, his arms couldn't reach it. The calico cat was especially short. As he leaned forward more and more, his feet finally lifted off his chair. The stove cat hesitated to help because of what had happened before. He blinked his eyes for a while. Finally, he couldn't bear to just watch, so he stood up. However, right at that moment, the calico cat leaned out too far. He flipped over with a crash and fell off the desk, hitting his head hard. It made a very loud noise. The chief black cat was surprised and stood up. He grabbed a bottle of smelling salts from the shelf behind him. But the calico cat quickly got up. Out of pure anger, he suddenly yelled, "Stove cat, how dare you push me down?" This time, however, the chief quickly calmed the calico cat down. "No, Mr. Calico, you are wrong." The stove cat just stood up out of kindness. He didn't even touch you. But anyway, such a small thing doesn't matter at all. Now let's see the notice of moving for Santan. Ah, yes. The chief quickly started his work. The calico cat had no choice but to start working too. Still, he often glared at the stove cat with scary eyes. Because things were like this, it was truly painful for the stove cat. The stove cat wanted to become a normal cat. He tried sleeping outside the window many times. However, it was too cold at night, and he couldn't stop sneezing. So, he had no choice but to go inside the stove again. Why did he feel so cold? It was because his skin was thin. And why was his skin thin? It was because he was born during the hottest days of summer. The stove cat thought, "It is my fault after all. It can't be helped." Tears filled his round eyes. "But the chief is so kind to me," he thought. Also, all his fellow stove cats were so proud and happy that he was working in the office. "No matter how hard it gets, I won't quit. I will definitely endure it." The stove cat made tight fists while crying. However, even the chief became unreliable. Cats seem smart, but they can be foolish. One day, the stove cat was unlucky and caught a cold. The base of his leg swelled up like a bowl. He couldn't walk at all, so he finally had to take a day off. The stove cat struggled deeply with this. He cried, and cried. Looking at the yellow light shining through the small window of the barn, he rubbed his eyes and cried all day long. Meanwhile, things went like this at the office. "I wonder why. The stove cat hasn't arrived yet today. He is late," the chief said during a break from work. Oh, he probably went to the beach to play, the white cat said. No, he must have been invited to some banquet, the tabby cat said. Is there a banquet somewhere today? The chief asked in surprise. He believed there was no cat banquet that he would not be invited to. I heard there's a school opening ceremony in the north or something. Is that so? The black cat became silent and thought deeply. Well, actually, the calico cat started saying, the stove cat has been invited everywhere these days. He is reportedly saying that he will become the next chief. So all the foolish guys are scared of him and trying their best to please him. Is that true? Shouted the black cat. It is absolutely true. You should check it yourself. The calico cat said, pouting his lips. How outrageous! I have been taking very good care of him. All right, I have an idea. Then the office fell completely silent for a while. Now it was the next day. The swelling on the stove cat's leg had finally gone down. He was happy and came to the office early in the morning through the howling wind. Usually, as soon as he arrived, he would touch the cover of his important record book. But his record book was gone from his desk. It had been divided and placed on the 3 desks across from him. Oh, they must have been very busy yesterday, the stove cat mumbled in a hoarse voice. For some reason, his heart was beating fast. Clatter. The door opened, and the calico cat came in. Good morning. The stove cat stood up and greeted him. But the calico cat sat down silently. Then he started flipping through his book as if he were very busy. Bang! Slam! The tabby cat came in. Good morning. The stove cat stood up and greeted him, but the tabby cat didn't even look his way. Good morning, said the calico cat. Good morning. The wind is terrible today. The tabby cat also quickly began flipping through his book. Clatter, slam. The white cat came in. Good morning. The tabby cat and the calico cat greeted him together. Morning. It's a terrible wind. The white cat also started working busily. At that time, the stove cat stood weakly and bowed in silence. However, the white cat completely ignored him. Bang, slam. Phew, the wind is quite terrible. The chief black cat came in. Good morning. The 3 clerks quickly stood up and bowed. The stove cat also stood there blankly and bowed while looking down. It's like a storm. Well, the black cat said this without looking at the stove cat. He started working right away. Now, today we must finish checking the ammoniac brothers from yesterday and reply. Second clerk, who among the ammoniac brothers went to the South Pole? The work began. The stove cat just stood silently, looking down. He had no record book. He wanted to say something about it, but he couldn't make a sound anymore. It was Pan Polaris, the tabby cat answered. Good. Explain Pan Polaris in detail, the black cat said. Oh, that is my job. My record book, the stove cat thought as if he were crying. Pan Polaris died off the coast of Yap Island on his way back from a South Pole expedition. His body was buried at sea. The first clerk, the white cat, was reading from the stove cat's record book. The stove cat felt so sad. He felt a sour pain in his cheeks, and his ears were ringing. He held it in and kept his head down. The office gradually became busy and heated up like boiling water. The work moved forward quickly. Everyone only glanced at the stove cat once in a while, but they didn't say a single word to him. Then it was noon. The stove cat didn't even eat the lunch he had brought. He just sat perfectly still with his hands on his knees, looking down. Finally, starting from 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the stove cat began to cry quietly. He cried, stopped, and cried again for about 3 hours until evening. Even so, everyone worked happily, as if they knew nothing about it all. Right at that moment, the cats didn't notice, but a magnificent golden head of a lion appeared outside the window behind the chief. The lion looked inside suspiciously for a while. Then he suddenly knocked on the door and walked in. The cats were incredibly shocked. They could only pace around the room in a panic. Only the stove cat stopped crying and stood up straight. The lion spoke in a loud, firm voice. "What are you all doing? With this kind of behavior, you don't need geography or history. Stop right now. I order this office to be closed." In this way, the office was closed down. I partly agree with the lion. The end.
最後までお聞きいただき、ありがとうございました。この後は、もう一度音声を聞きながら、シャドーイングや音読にも挑戦してみましょう。繰り返し学習することで、少しずつ英語が身についていきます。また次回の作品でお会いしましょう。ありがとうございました。